Why humans needed clothes. Do you know which creature on Earth has to put on clothes every single day? It is strange when you think about it. Tigers are born with striped coats. Bears have thick fur to keep them warm, yet humans enter the world almost completely bare. Why our ancestors began covering their bodies, and exactly when they started doing it, has fascinated scientists for generations. Clothes feel like such a normal part of life today, but there was once a time when humans lived without them at all. The story begins with a major change in the human body. Our ancestors lost most of their body hair. More than 1 million years ago, early humans gradually became far less hairy than their ape-like ancestors. Smoother skin allowed sweat to evaporate more efficiently, which was extremely useful for staying active and pursuing animals beneath the intense African sun. Better cooling meant humans could keep moving for longer in the heat, but that advantage came with a serious cost. Losing that protective coat of hair created an entirely new problem. Human skin was now far more exposed to sunlight, insect bites, scratches, and thorny vegetation. And when colder weather arrived, there was no longer a natural layer of fur to help trap body heat. The bare skin that worked so well in the heat suddenly became a weakness as temperatures dropped. Our ancestors had gained a powerful cooling system, but they had also lost their built-in insulation. Surprisingly, humans appear to have lived without regular clothing for hundreds of thousands of years after losing most of their body hair. Scientific evidence suggests that hair loss happened long before clothing became a normal part of human life. For an enormous stretch of time, our ancestors adapted to the African environment with little or nothing covering their bodies. In other words, clothing did not appear the moment our fur disappeared. Something had to create enough pressure for covering the body to become truly necessary. So how can scientists possibly figure out when humans started wearing clothes? Prehistoric animal hides, plant fibers, and leaves usually decay long before they can survive in the archaeological record. But the answer may have been preserved by one tiny and extremely annoying detective, lice. Ancient clothing itself has almost completely vanished, yet parasites that lived alongside humans carried traces of that history in their genes. These tiny parasites eventually split into two very different groups. Head lice live and lay their eggs in human hair, while clothing lice live and reproduce in the folds and fibers of clothing. Clothing lice depend on garments for their habitat, which means they could only have emerged after humans began wearing clothes regularly. Before clothing existed, there was simply nowhere for them to live. That makes the moment when clothing lice diverged from head lice an unusually valuable clue. The tiny clue in your clothes. By using what is sometimes called a genetic clock, researchers have estimated when that split occurred. Genetic studies suggest that clothing lice diverged from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago. This does not give us an exact date for the invention of clothing, but it provides important evidence that humans were wearing clothes regularly by around that period. Remarkably, part of the history of clothing was uncovered not from an ancient shirt or animal hide, but from the DNA of a tiny parasite. Around that same broad period, the climate was becoming much colder. Global temperatures fell, and even parts of Africa that were normally warm could experience much harsher conditions. For humans with relatively bare skin, cold weather created a serious survival problem. As temperatures dropped, exposed skin could no longer provide enough protection on its own. Our ancestors needed a new insulating layer to replace the natural coat they had lost long before. The earliest clothing was probably extremely simple. Instead of carefully tailored garments, our ancestors could use animal hides draped or wrapped around the body like rough cloaks. Animals provided meat, and their skins could also become valuable protection against the cold. These coverings offered warmth, but because they were not tightly sewn around the body, wind could still slip through the gaps. Even so, it marked a major turning point. Humans had learned to turn another animal's skin into an artificial protective layer of their own, but there was another challenge. How do you remove an animal hide without ruining it? Sharp stone tools could easily puncture, slice, or tear a valuable skin if they were used too roughly. Prehistoric humans needed more specialized tools that could scrape and process hides with greater control. The more intact the skin remained, the easier it was to wrap around the body and use for warmth. That need helped drive the development of increasingly refined tools for working animal hides. One important clue comes from an ancient cave in Morocco that preserved evidence dating back about 120,000 years. Archaeologists discovered 62 carefully shaped tools made from animal bone. Many were fashioned from ribs and used to scrape away fat and connective tissue from hides without tearing them. This suggests that our ancestors were no longer simply throwing freshly removed skins over their shoulders. They had learned to process animal hides carefully, making them softer, cleaner, and more useful as body coverings. And our ancestors were not only taking hides from large, gentle herbivores. Inside the same cave, researchers found bones from sand foxes, golden jackals, and wildcats marked with unusual cut patterns. Cuts around the paws and jaws suggest that these animals were deliberately skinned for their fur. Those thick, soft pelts could have provided better insulation as temperatures dropped. Instead of using whatever skin was available, humans may already have been choosing certain animals for the special qualities of their fur. Preparing animal hides this way required patience, precision, and considerable skill. Prehistoric people had to break animal ribs at the right points, then grind and polish the bone until it became smooth enough to work a hide safely. The process helped turn stiff, rough skins into softer coverings that were easier to wear. One careless movement could tear a valuable hide and ruin hours of work. So even a simple prehistoric garment represented an entire chain of techniques that had to be learned, practiced, and passed from one generation to the next. Clothes opened the frozen world. Clothing became one of the technologies that allowed humans to survive far beyond the warm environments of Africa. Without protection from the cold, moving into colder northern regions would have been much more difficult. Animal skins gave our ancestors an extra insulating layer as they entered environments their bodies were not naturally built for. A species shaped by the African climate could now carry its own artificial layer of protection wherever it traveled. Clothing greatly expanded the range of places humans could survive. But when our ancestors entered these new regions, they were not alone. Neanderthals and Denisovans had already been living across parts of Europe and Asia for a very long time. Neanderthals in particular had powerful, stocky bodies that were well suited to cold environments. If we judge the competition only by physical build, modern humans might seem to have been at a disadvantage. So why did the story eventually unfold so differently? Neanderthals were extremely capable survivors, yet they eventually disappeared while Homo sapiens endured. One proposed difference lies in the technology used to make clothing. Neanderthals appear to have relied heavily on relatively simple hide coverings, while modern humans eventually developed more sophisticated ways of shaping and fastening garments. In freezing environments, that seemingly small technological difference could affect how much body heat was retained. Better clothing could make survival in severe cold much easier. Neanderthals were intelligent and highly adaptable, but their clothing may often have been relatively simple. They could pierce hides and use strips of leather or other bindings to fasten pieces together, creating coverings that functioned something like cloaks. Some researchers have estimated that these garments may have covered roughly 70 to 80% of the body. They were certainly useful, but loose coverings still left openings where freezing wind and snow could reach the skin. A cloak could protect much of the body without forming a completely sealed layer around it. The needle that changed everything. Meanwhile, modern humans developed a remarkable tool that would transform clothing, the bone needle. Evidence from South Africa suggests that bone tools capable of fine piercing and sewing appeared tens of thousands of years ago, with some examples dating to around 61,000 years ago. Needles allowed pieces of hide to be joined much more closely and securely. Instead of simply tying skins around the body, people could begin shaping garments to fit the arms, legs, torso, and other parts of the body more precisely. That tiny sewing tool helped change the way humans protected themselves from the cold. Loose animal skin coverings could gradually be replaced by more closely fitted garments that trapped warm air near the body. Better-fitting clothing reduced the number of openings where freezing wind could enter and allowed a much larger percentage of the body to remain covered. In extremely cold environments, even small improvements in insulation could make an enormous difference. Humans could now travel and survive in places that would have been far more dangerous with only loose hides. The sewing needle also made another important development possible, wearing multiple layers of clothing, including softer layers close to the skin. Fine bone needles could join thinner, more flexible pieces of hide into garments worn underneath heavier outer coverings. Layering trapped more warm air and also prevented rough animal skins from constantly rubbing against bare skin. Clothing was no longer just a single hide wrapped around the body. It was becoming a complete system of overlapping layers designed to protect humans from the environment. Remarkably, one of the oldest known eyed needles may have been made by another kind of human. At Denisova Cave in Siberia, archaeologists discovered an exquisitely crafted bone needle about 7 centimeters long, complete with a tiny eye for thread. The needle is around 50,000 years old and may have been made by Denisovans. This suggests that sophisticated sewing technology was not limited to the direct ancestors of modern humans. Some of our ancient human relatives were also capable of shaping bone into tools precise enough to pierce and stitch animal hides. The beginnings of textile technology may also be hidden in some surprisingly tiny remains. In Georgia, archaeologists discovered wild flax fibers dating back about 30,000 years. Even more astonishing, some of those fibers had been dyed in colors including pink, turquoise, and black. By this point, humans were apparently thinking about more than simply staying warm. Color and appearance were beginning to matter too, suggesting that the things people wore were becoming a form of visual expression. As the Ice Age reached some of its coldest periods, clothing took on an entirely new role. In freezing environments, people had to cover themselves from head to toe for long stretches of the year. But those layers of clothing also hid whatever decorations, ochre paintings, or tattoos they may have displayed directly on their skin. Marks that once helped express identity could now disappear beneath layers of animal hide. And if no one could see the art on your skin anymore, where could that art go instead? When clothing became fashion, the answer helped turn prehistoric clothing into something much more than protection from the cold. People began placing decoration directly onto what they wore. Clothing was no longer simply a survival tool. It could become a visible way to express identity, attract attention, and communicate belonging. A garment could tell others something about the person wearing it and perhaps even signal which community that person belonged to. The sewing needle now had another job, attaching decorations to clothing. Fine holes and careful stitching made it possible to sew beads, animal teeth, and shells onto garments. With every movement of the body, those ornaments would move as well. Clothing could now become something like wearable art, transforming the person inside it into part of the display. What began as protection from cold was becoming a canvas for human creativity. Few archaeological sites reveal this transformation more dramatically than Sungir in Russia. Burials dating back roughly 34,000 years contained human remains surrounded by thousands of carefully crafted beads made from mammoth ivory. Producing each tiny bead required an enormous amount of work, and creating the decorations for a single outfit could have demanded thousands of hours of labor. That level of effort makes one thing clear: these people were thinking about far more than simply keeping their bodies warm. These elaborate beaded garments were probably not just beautiful. They may also have communicated social identity and status. At Sungir, 2 children were buried in extraordinarily rich graves containing more than 10,000 mammoth-ivory beads. The immense amount of labor invested in their burial clothing suggests that dress could carry deep social meaning even in prehistoric communities. Clothing had become a silent language, capable of showing that a person held a special place within the group. Prehistoric clothing could also be remarkably varied and specialized. In the bitter cold of northern Eurasia, extremely fine needles made it possible to create fitted items such as gloves, hoods, and warm footwear. Fur could also be arranged around the edges of head coverings to help shield the face from freezing wind and blowing snow. Humans were no longer relying on a single hide wrapped around the body. They were developing an entire system of clothing designed for different body parts and different environmental challenges. What began as loose animal skins eventually became an inseparable part of human culture. Clothing could help show who you were, where you belonged, and perhaps even what position you held within your community. And when the Ice Age eventually ended and many regions became warmer, humans did not simply abandon clothing and return to a completely naked way of life. By then, clothing had moved far beyond its original role as insulation. It had become part of identity and part of the way humans understood one another. The journey from rough animal hides to carefully made and beautifully decorated garments helped shape the world of modern humans. Clothing became a kind of artificial skin, allowing a species without thick natural fur to survive in environments its biology alone could never fully handle. At the same time, it turned the human body into a place for displaying craftsmanship, art, identity, and social meaning. So every morning when you put on your clothes, you are continuing an ancient tradition that helped change the course of human history.